our webinar, Open Access to Gurus Tony and Scott, and today's special guest is Sandra Hendren, another highly seasoned senior consultant with TMA, also our resident healthcare and big data expert who will be debuting a new seminar for the modeling agency entitled Big Data, Rhetoric and Reality. We're really excited about that. So if you subscribe to TMA's newsletter, you'll receive more information about this unique seminar ahead of its debut. So each question you submit will receive multiple perspectives. We do have great questions coming in now. There's room for a few more, so as you think of them, go ahead and enter them, and we'll read them aloud live for Tony, Scott, Sandra, or myself to respond. So let's jump right in. We have a question from Kevin. Let me make sure that everyone's unmuted. This is sometimes a mistake of mine. Looks like we're all okay. Tony, you're still muted. When you're ready, go ahead and unmute. Kevin asks, how can I sell predictive analytics in a large company that is not used to analytics? And actually, we ran into an organization recently that is kind of run by the old guard that probably perceives predictive analytics or any kind of analytics to be cryptic and somewhat of a necessary exercise, but hadn't really seen much tangible results. So I'd say there's a few stages to step into that, and starting with training. And let me go ahead, and I'm getting a little bit of background feedback. I'll go ahead and mute if we need to. Starts with training is a great place to begin, whether it's with a short seminar, an executive overview that kind of demystifies the practice a little bit. And if that's getting some clearance, and also that can really help to create technology advocates, those that have a greater understanding of not only the whys and the whats, but what have others realized with this. And one of the biggest motivators of leadership in an organization is to hear what competitors are doing with analytics. That often really gets them moving. So if there's a way to reveal that and get a sense of we are already behind, that often will make a significant push and buy-in from leadership. Once you have that, an assessment, a comprehensive assessment is a great next idea, because that's going to map out specifically for the organization where the limitations, where the opportunities are, and with the opportunities, kind of a cross-section of the greatest opportunities, kind of a rank order of those to begin with. It's almost like you're cheating. You're getting to look across all of your resources, get your objectives aligned from leadership, also a lot of other environmental considerations to really reduce the risk of your initial implementation, and then have a plan forward to step into what Tony calls an incremental low-risk, high-impact pilot, so that we can really reduce the risk of developing an analytic practice that teases out gains as early as possible and can communicate those to leadership to justify further investment. So that's my initial pass at this. Let's go around the table here, and we're already at 20 after, I believe. Tony, we better start with you. You've got to head out of here early. That was another motivation to have Sandra on the call, too. So let's push this to you. Any other advice as far as how to sell predictive analytics in a large organization?
Well, I think the thing that has really become apparent in the last few years especially is that we spend far too much time looking at this as a math problem and as an IT problem. This conversation, to be acceptable, has to deliver business value. And I was talking about earlier, we use math, we use our data, but we have to deliver business value. And we do that by talking about resource allocation. We've got scarce resources. How do we spend our time more effectively? How do we spend our money more effectively? That's what you have to do to bring this into an organization today.
Great advice. Scott, what would you like to add about warming up leadership in an organization to analytics?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I had myself double muted here.
No,
Kevin,
that's great.
That's a really good question. I'd underscore everything that's already been said at this point. And just very quickly add, there's nothing like an actual project. So if you can find an actual project, do it on your own time and show some results. Usually results can be done through back testing. Then you can put some actual figures to the possibilities within your own organization.
Terrific. Thank you, Scott. And Sandra, as I bring this over to you, there's a very closely related question. Let me wrap this in as well. You combine the two together and then respond as you wish. Elaine asks, how do you demystify the perception that predictive analytics is witchcraft and should be governed more than other areas of IT and business intelligence in general I'd reinforce the training aspect of that, and that's, I think, going to underscore just how that's done. But in your experience, what is the best way to demystify predictive analytics for witchcraft across the organization, and why it's even more important than having this kind of structure in areas of IT and BI in general?
If I can respond to the question about the ROI first, and
Sure.
then take witchcraft second, if that's okay.
Oh, that's great.
Simply because the ROI of analytics and specifically predictive analytics has been a big interest of mine. I was chief data scientist for a market research firm a little more than a year ago and did executive interviews, and this was consistently the #1 question. So I have done some real digging. I have come up with some real numbers that even I would trust. The ROI has, we as a profession have failed to state the ROI in general. I believe there is a very good paper from an MIT professor called Strength in Numbers, How Does Data-Driven Decision-Making Affect Firm Performance? And he shows that holding all other characteristics like capital investment, return on market value, et cetera, constant over 170 large organizations, that those companies that use analytics, I'll get to predictive analytics in a moment, analytics in general are 6% higher productivity. Another paper that I found called The Business Value of Predictive Analytics by a firm that I trust, IDC, found 250% ROI in general on predictive analytic projects. Yet a third paper that I found called The Stages of an Analytic Enterprise from Nuclear Research found up to 8 and 9 times 800 and 900% return on investment on predictive analytics. So there are some sources out there. It takes a lot of digging. I have spent the time doing that. This is part of what I discuss, if I may plug it, the Big Data Seminar, Rhetoric and Reality that is coming up. Your second question, very briefly, how to demystify and separate it from witchcraft proof of concept. I have found that no amount of talking and even those great statistics that I just quoted for you makes any difference. What you have to do is show people, not say it to people. And so find a particularly salient business question that is small and manageable, that you can put a good team together, do a proof of concept, be clear about all the things that Tony was telling you, your business objectives, your metrics, etc. You have to show people.
Sandra, that was fantastic. Not only did you answer those two questions thoroughly, you anticipated, and we're in the predictive business, right? You predicted the next question and answered that one as well. Sunita, hopefully that was more than adequate for your question. How does predictive analytics contribute to a firm's or organization's competitive advantage? And with the numbers and the returns that Sandra just expressed, hopefully you can see just how powerful analytics can be when it is applied the right way with that strategic emphasis. So fantastic, Sandra. Thanks so much. Tony did have to exit, and that does not leave us short in any way. Tony has phenomenal experience, but at the same time, we are left in the great hands of Scott and Sandra. As we continue on with some more questions, I realize we're about 8 minutes away from the 90-minute promise that we had. We're more than happy to stick around a little bit longer. Let me take a look here at what the group that we still have with us. And yeah, we've still got more than 2/3 coming up at the end of 90 minutes, and that's a long duration for a webinar. We do understand that, but we hope you also appreciate the content that you're receiving and the interactions that you have live here in the Q&A. So let's continue with the next question. Let me take a couple of quickies here. These are almost more housekeeping, because there were a few that had this concern, and this comes from Florian. A request, please do not distribute my email or send me spam unless you signed up. And I completely empathize with the question because there's so many webinars that are out to just collect your information and haunt you forever. Ours is completely by permission. You will receive one follow-up, which is resources that through the Q&A and some other good-to-know resources, and it's really not an advertisement. You'll receive a single email follow-up and then no forward follow-up unless you signed up for our newsletter by permission. That's what we'll send out to you, and it's very easy to unsubscribe from that. So we'll be very mindful and respectful of your contact information, and we don't harvest your content otherwise or use it for any other purpose except for that one-time follow-up. Let's see, Natali asks, can you email us the reference articles just mentioned? Yes. The citations would be great. I think that's to you, Sandra. If you have any summaries or if you have links to some of the resources that you cited, anything that can be summarized, send that to me by email if you could, whatever you have, and
Sure.
we'll put that into the email that follows up after the event. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, here's a great one for both of you. Peter asks, what is the current state of play with data mining and big data, for example, Hadoop? And Sandra, I'd love to start with you on this when we always change up the order, and this certainly comes into your domain, and certainly with the big data rhetoric and reality course. And don't feel compelled to answer at a tactical level when we're looking at current state of play. You can mention Hadoop in the larger context, but what do you feel? Because I know that this is really what the seminar focuses, is the current state of play and putting the hype in its place and showing where the realities are of true application and where the industry is in general. But where do you see the state of play, as Peter puts it, in data mining and big data?
State of play in data mining, big data, or Hadoop specifically? I'm sorry. Would you clarify the question for me?
Sure, yeah, and Peter, feel free to type live here and clarify it a little bit more, but I'm going to take a guess here at what Peter's looking at. The state of play perhaps in analytics and big data. So many people are investing so heavily in the practice of big data, and I would venture to say that without the analytic component, it's very hard to get return from that large big data investment of the structuring the data and storing it and looking at the transportation of the data, perhaps a lot of the cleansing, until we can get to the analytic state. That's when we really see the value. So where do you see most organizations in their journey from standing up big data, understanding what it is, getting their arms around it, to moving ahead with the analytics that will really provide the kind of ROI that you had expressed?
A small number of organizations.
And Peter just wrote in. Let me interrupt. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, Peter just said, okay, for just Hadoop, but feel free to comment on NoSQL, MongoDB, or others. Hadoop seems to be very important. And it's up to you if you want to respond more from a higher strategic industry level, or if you'd like to wrap in some of the tools and techniques.
I have so much to say about this. It's going to be hard to
we won't forget about you, Scott. You're next.
The number one point is that, like so many fads, I use that word with great choice, like so many fads of the past, the technology vendors have defined the business for us. That's a mistake. And it has led to a lot of false starts. Again, when I did executive interviews a little less than a year ago of use of big data, it was that everyone's trying to figure it out, but as far as putting actual money into it, I am going from memory, which annoys me about myself, but it was less than 20% of organizations have actually implemented or actually begun to develop a big data project. Of those who have, there's the problem of moving from that first project to, okay, so what does this mean for our organization? Is it something that we should be doing enterprise-wide, or is this a spot sort of effort? There is so much confusion in the marketplace. I come from an academic, a teaching background, and it's very annoying to me to see all the confusion, which is one of the reasons I came to Eric, or he came to me. We kind of put this seminar together. As far as Hadoop, first of all, you do know it's the name of the developer's toy elephant, don't you? Second of all, it has some great value, but it is often misused. The value is it is a very cheap storage mechanism. Hadoop is both a hardware-software component and a processing component. I'm talking about just the hardware component now. It's terrific as a cheap storage mechanism. Let's talk about the process. The analytic processes around it. Originally, a couple of years ago, was only MapReduce. MapReduce is not an analytic tool, even though there are many IT people that think it is. They have never really done used an analytic tool. It can count, okay? So then you need to put an analytic tool on top of that. The legacy analytic tools are developing their own direct interfaces to Hadoop, so you can cut out sort of that middle person, that middle sort of process. And I have developed kind of a generalized architecture for big data that has a place for Hadoop, but also shows the other sort of analytic tools, because at the end of the day, it's not the data, it's the analysis of the data that makes the difference. Boy, I'm trying to be concise. I probably should give up for the moment about that. It's difficult to say so little about so much.
Well, I know, and that's such a broad topic, and then to tie it together with analytics, it's daunting to keep it concise. And I think what I'll do to fit in a couple of more questions here, because we are up at the bottom of the hour, is we'll go back and forth, maybe one question apiece, and the next will be Scott's. Let me take one very quickly here, and I'm going to make another. Sunita asked, how do you define big data? And I don't know what time you came in, Sunita, but we had a slide toward the beginning that I think kind of summarized it where it is. And I think it's just starting to mature a little bit beyond this. But here's the slide that we had earlier to kind of express the definition or the state of the big data industry. And it's a pretty common claim that's out there, or analogy that big data is like teenage sex. So you can read that, and that's the quip. Scott, from your experience, what do you hear about big data? And then we'll proceed on to the next question for you.
Well, I can answer this one pretty easily. Big data to me is one byte more than I can efficiently manage in the amount of time that I'm allotted.
That's perfect, and it's also very relative, right?
Yeah. You know, in the old days, I remember when a gigabyte of data was big data. And today, you know, I hear everybody say, well, this is different. Well, yeah, sure, we got some different tools that we use, but they're just tools. The core concepts have not changed. They may have evolved a little bit, but they're still the same. And if people think that big data is big data today, just like when a gigabyte of data was big data, waiting another 10 years, and you're going to look back at this point in time, and you're going to say, wow, that wasn't so big after all. So, you know, really it's not as much revolutionary as it is evolutionary. We're on a timeline that's increasing at a geometric rate, and so what's big data today will not be big data tomorrow.
Absolutely, that's a great way to put it into context. And let me read a response from Peter, wrapping up, I think, from Sandra's portion. I agree. I heard another statistic in the briefing room with Eric Kavanaugh and Robin Bloor that only about 20% of big data projects are in production, and the rest are just data science projects, in quotes. I agree that with most of your points, and to me, analytics will be the best use case. Thanks very much, Sandra. So, no, that was great. And Sunita, no problem. And when you could join, I'm glad we could still share that slide for you. We have some funny quips in the waiting room at the beginning of the webinar, so happy to reference that slide for you. All right, and for Scott, how long does it take for organizations to realize gains from good data science? Well, I'm gonna venture to say that's far more to do with their strategic preparation than the tactical. But and I'd also say that it varies greatly, and it really matters how much experience they have, or how much experience they can reach out to in order to help them start the project the right way. What's your take on how long it takes for an organization to realize gains from good data science? And I guess that has to be parsed into the right way and the wrong way to get started, right?
Well, I agree. That's a very difficult question to encapsulate and answer with a single metric. But really, what you have to have is you have to have buy-in from and participation from those who lead the company. You have to have the appropriate tools, and most important, after the buy-in, is to have the proper type of talent. If you're starting at square one and you're growing everything in-house, it's going to take a longer time than if you already have the talent and the buy-in. So there's not a single answer. Generally, what you want to do is you want to take an incremental approach to getting it done or getting it developed in-house. And generally, what you want to do is you want to pick the lowest hanging fruit first, so that you can see positive impact as quickly as possible. Usually, if you're in a business, that will be in the marketing department. It may be in finance, but there's not a pat answer. There's too many variables.
No, that's understandable. Sandra, would you like to expand?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Sure.
I would like to add to it. I of course, agree with everything that Scott just said, but a finding that I found particularly interesting in my research on the business value of analytics, some of these papers that I previously referenced, it is a very important point, and that is, unlike most business initiatives, such as reengineering or total quality management or lean manufacturing if you're manufacturing, and unlike most IT initiatives, such as CRMs and ERPs, unlike all of those, the advantage of analytics is that the longer you have analytics-driven projects and decisions in your company, the higher the ROI is, so that it's cumulative. Most other projects have a one-time hit. Business or IT projects have a one-time reduction in cost or increase in revenue, increase in profit. The difference here is that it is cumulative. The longer you use analytics in your business processes, the higher the ROI is. You can't beat that. That is very close to sustainable competitive advantage.
Fantastic. Great observation. Great to share with the group. All right, and I think we'll do one more question, and we'll have to wrap up as we're already running close to 10 minutes over on the promised end of the event. We always like to go a little bit further in the Q&A, and we always find it to be, we love the interaction. So Justin asks, I would like to, well, you know what, I'm going to have to do two more because there's two great questions here to wrap up with. So let's start with Justin. Justin, I would like to narrow my search for deciding on a problem to solve when there are two or three, and how far back the data should have to be. All right, I'll take a first turn at this and try to keep it brief, but I would say this is where, in the plan portion that you saw from the process model, this is where the assessment and the resulting plan is so critical. This is where you're looking across the organization to understand the environment in which it's going to play. Does it have to be live and operational? Are there users that will have to adopt it? But moreover, once you understand what the potential questions we want to answer for the analytic modeling, then we'll have a better understanding of whether the available resources even align with it. And what you come down with, what you end up with, is that cross-section of valid potential projects, and then you can rank them as far as which ones will have the greatest impact on the organization. And there's very few who start it this way. Most people start the book on Chapter 5. They jump in with the data and the software, and they develop more than adequate models that just never have a home. They never had a chance because they did not resolve a lot of the strategic considerations that are critical to the success of predictive modeling at the project level. So that's my throw out there for Justin's question. Let's start with Scott this time. If Justin wants to narrow the search for deciding on a problem to solve when there's at least two or three, and then how far back to look for the data to support those problems, what advice would you like to give to Justin?
Okay, I'll take the second part of that first. The second part depends on the problem you're trying to solve. There's basically two types of analytical approaches that we can take. One approach is a cross-sectional analysis that is where you're assuming a ceteris paribus situation, that time is not a factor, that yesterday is the same as today, and a broad general rule of thumb is you probably don't want to go back more than 2 years in your data. But then there are other types of problems that might be time series related, and if they're time series related, you'll want to go further back than a couple of years. As a matter of fact, a couple of years is probably not enough data. So it depends upon the problem itself, and that leads back into the first part of the question. You have to do your assessment up front, as Eric was saying. Certainly some of the things that you have to do is you have to figure out what the requirements are. Are there any cost impacts? You get input from your subject matter experts, and you actually do a pro forma financial analysis up front to say, okay, what are the possible trade-offs in terms of cost versus benefit.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Scott. Sandra, anything to add?
A thought or two. My advice, if you have 3 competing possibilities, decrease your complexity, make it as simple and straightforward as possible, meaning decrease the amount of data and or the technology that you need to get going. Set yourself up as best you can for success by making your path as easy as possible. Unfortunately, many people do the opposite, is what I have seen. Somehow I always get called in to fix it. This didn't work, this algorithm failed, blah, blah, blah. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see, other than failure to state the business objectives, is that people get, the team gets engrossed with complexity because of some assumption, I don't know where this comes from, that predictive analytics can just rip out all that complexity and tell you truth. This seminar alone tells you reasons that that is not true. So my advice is just keep it as simple as possible. You want to hit a home run if you can. Why would you have people throwing you curveballs and speedballs if you can just get a nice, easy lob over the plate?
Absolutely. And with a lot of projects, just achieving that simplicity can sometimes be a challenge, but maintaining focus on that simplicity, boy, does it pay dividends on a whole lot of levels. Fantastic advice. And our last question, having us go over a little bit, but we still have nearly half of everyone that was in the event sticking with us well over on, like I say, what is already a long event. So thanks so much for remaining so interested. It's a great compliment to us to have such high retention. So the last question, Kishan, what are ways to identify potential usable dimensions from large volumes of data? Let's start this time with Sandra, because this, I think this also comes into your area if we take large volume to mean, big data. I know that's, certainly a relative term. But what are ways to identify potential usable dimensions? I would think that also means variables or attributes from large volumes of data.
This is where the art comes into predictive analysis as much as science, in my opinion. It's a tight line to walk because the short answer is, with some research with domain experts, subject matter experts, business people giving you some knowledge to start with. Now, the flip side of that is you don't want to be so confined in that approach that you are not open to new ideas and therefore new variables that represent those ideas or knowledge. So it's a very fine line to walk. I'm trained as a statistician, so I've always been trained that parsimonious models are the best, and parsimonious, and in the old days, I could get up on a whiteboard and prove to you statistically why that was true, okay? But parsimonious models are also the most direct models, and parsimony begins with dimensions, choice of features, variables, dimensions, whichever word you want to use. They're all used interchangeably. It's a bit of an art. I wish I had you do this, this, and that, and you're done, but sort of response. I'm afraid I don't on this one.
Sure, no, and that goes along with what Tony was saying. There's a lot of aspects of this that you just can't cookbook. You can certainly have a large overriding framework to step you through the major phases, tasks, and subtasks, but there's many aspects that really comes down to what I say is that highly seasoned experience in applying that art. Scott, how would you like to expand?
Very easily, very quickly. A lot of this stuff we cover in the course. But at the same time, this is a common part of what we do in our data prep stage of model development. So it's a common thing, and basically it boils down into two things. There's a qualitative assessment. There's a quantitative assessment. The quantitative assessment is basically you come up with your list of potential attributes because what you're wanting to do is a very common problem of reducing the dimensionality of the data that you're going to be dealing with. And you literally go through the process of tabbing this stuff, computing descriptive statistics in relation to your target variable, and a whole lot of processes that are possible. So that's the quantitative side of it. The qualitative side of it is, as was already mentioned, you go to your subject matter experts and say, hey, what do you know? What do you know? What's worked in the past? What do you think about this kind of stuff? And generally, I think the qualitative test is underemphasized and as important as the quantitative side of it. I have a term for it. I call it the sniff test. Does this make sense?
Exactly. Yeah, you got to keep your sights set on that. And I'd add one other. Nobody's really starving these days for more data, but sometimes there's phenomenal value to be had from data enrichment external to the organization, and that shouldn't be overlooked as far as what else is available to us. This often comes in more often with B2C data, where you can acquire more demographic and psychographic data or through polling, things of that nature. But I've seen a lot of data enrichment vendors who are more than willing to do a comprehensive append, and then as Sandra was alluding to, your models can then automatically determine which ones have the highest level of contribution to the target. And then instead of having to buy a lot of dimensions that you don't really need, you can quantify which ones really have more than enough predictive value to justify the acquisition. And that's then when you would have a billing from the data enrichment vendor, but it would be well worth it after going through that cost-benefit analysis to go ahead and acquire those few attributes going forward. So just an additional note there to even though nobody's short on transactional data, additional attributes they're always good to consider and to evaluate. And the more you have, the more you can choose from, and then whittle it down to those that are going to really give the biggest boost to the model. So that is our final question, and at a quarter till the hour, almost coming up on 2 solid hours here. Thanks to those of you who have hung around the entire time, but at about nearly a quarter till, we're going to draw this event to a close. Certainly like to thank our attendees again for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Tony for your great segments, and of course our special guest panelist, Sandra Hendren, and for your valuable contributions in the Q&A. And let me see if I need to mute here. I'm getting an echo. Let me check here. I'm going to mute out these. And like I promised, we'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. From there, we hope you've offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. Make sure to act quickly to secure one of the few remaining 15% discounted seats for the upcoming Orlando production. Let me make sure I didn't mute myself. Nope, we are good. And if that time of your location doesn't work for you, keep the Las Vegas and Washington, D.C. events in mind for the April and May months, respectively. And don't forget that your colleagues can join you anytime for 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, like you've experienced with our panelists today, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Scott, Tony, and Sandra, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.